Hello and welcome to Bend the Knee, a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. I am Sir Matt, the Bud Knight.
And I am Sir Jimmy of House Nuts. And today on our wonderful podcast, we are joined by a guest.
That's right. We have Kale Easy over on TikTok. Nikki, you've been on the show before. A lot of fun to have you back again. How are we doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having me back. Yeah, I'm great. I'm excited to sort of get chatting about House of the Dragon and mainly see what you guys think as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just want to dive in and just sort of like general thoughts. I mean, you also went to the premiere. We talked about that just a little bit before we hit record here. So, if you want to talk about that for maybe a couple minutes and say what that was like.
Yeah, that was insane because I sort of, it started off as a joke. I made a joke video on TikTok, like, oh, where's my invite? And then I kept pushing, and then Sky TV in the UK, so they run Sky Atlantic, which is where we watch HBO shows. They messaged me on TikTok and were like, "Hey, yeah, we've got some tickets for you." So that was crazy. I definitely cried all evening, and then I sort of freaked out. You know, what am I going to wear? All this kind of stuff. So that was admin side of things. And yeah, so we got there. We did go down the red carpet. It's very separate. As I was saying just before we started. They have like the important people and then the sort of less important people. We were the less important people, but they let you kind of like wander down at your own pace. Everything sort of kept moving. And then you sort of get onto the red carpet where all the sort of cast and crew are, and they're doing interviews and taking photos and that kind of thing. And that was awesome. Like, that part doesn't take too long. You, like I say, you're kind of kept moving, but the atmosphere was insane. So there's sort of like staging that they'd done for it. There were like castle walls everywhere. They had, you know, the sort of music kind of play. It wasn't, because I kind of, when we got there, thought it was just going to be like the Game of Thrones soundtrack that we'd heard before, and it wasn't. We kind of got a sneak peek of all the music we were going to hear in the show. And then as you sort of go in, they throw drinks and popcorn at you. Great. You kind of sit down, you watch the feed from, you know, what's going on outside. And then the cast came in and said hello. They left. And then we got to watch the first episode after we'd put our phones in little sealed bags and Pinky promised that we wouldn't spoil anything. So yeah, we got the first episode, and then we got a sneak peek of what else was to come for the rest of the episode or the rest of the season. And that was really fun for me because I think last time I came on, we sort of talked about, I wonder how they're going to play this plot out. And I wonder how they're going to show us this interpretation of things. And you just got little sneak peeks of, oh, they're going down this route. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. But the worst part about it was sort of sitting on that for 2 weeks. And obviously, you know, everyone on TikTok knew that I'd been. And I was kind of being poked for, just give us a little crumb of something. And I couldn't do that. So that was crap. I kind of had all these little theories and exciting ideas in my head. And I really had to keep quiet for 2 weeks. But the actual experience of being at the premiere was awesome. I had so much fun. And I still can't believe I got to go. I'm so grateful for that. So, yeah.
That's that's so cool.
And here's the hoping for a season 2 premiere invite. I mean, that would be great.
That'd be amazing. Right? Yeah, that'd be really, really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone's watching that and has power over tickets, that's fine. Yeah. I'm sure it can be free.
2024, you know, if we get season 2, you know, although with everything going on at HBO and Warner Brothers, it's all up in the air right now. Is what it seems like. So okay, so you got to watch the episode 1 2 weeks before everybody else, and then, you know, sort of sitting on it. So I guess what were you kind of thinking after you, like, just the episode itself, like after you saw episode 1? Of course, you obviously had the experience too of seeing it at the premiere, but so like, when you walked out, like, what were you thinking about episode 1?
When I walked out, my poor friend, we're kind of like walking through London, and I was like, "Did you see this? Did you see that? I think this is going to happen." And then I kind of said to her, "Right, I need to sleep on this because I've got to sort of record some content and sort of tell everyone, hey, I've done this, and this is what my first impressions were." And B, I know I'm so super excited and jaded right now. I don't want to sort of just ride on that and let that influence my opinion. So yeah, I suppose as I was watching it, given how disappointed I think a lot of us were with season 8, my worry was what is this going to be? And I think one of the things that I said in my sort of takeaway video on TikTok was I was genuinely nervous for that first sort of 15, 20 minutes. Everything was really bright. We were looking at 2 teenage girls giggling in a garden under a tree, and everything was very, very lovely. And I was panicking. I kind of thought you've missed the mark on what this is. And it was when we get to the tourney, as Queen Emma is giving birth, and the Maester says to Viserys, like, this, that this is going really, really wrong. Your wife is going to die, but we could save the child potentially. Again, I'm still kind of thinking, well, yeah, that's kind of normal for that time. We've kind of seen similar things in Game of Thrones, or we've heard about it. The minute they pulled her down on that bed and she had no idea what was going on, straight away I thought, oh my God, we're back in Westeros. Mm-hmm. And just that scene in itself was like, oh my God, these guys know what they're doing. They know where we are. They've led us into this sort of false sense of, oh, the Targaryen dynasty was so lovely and everyone had so much fun. In that moment, I knew, okay, they know where they're going with this. And it just sort of set the tone for me, if that kind of makes sense. It was just in that very, very short segment. But right before then, I was literally, I don't know if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense, because like that time we're talking about, almost a century of peace, never before seen in Westeros since the First Men. And it did kind of feel a little bright, kind of giggly, and almost optimistic is a word I would probably use to describe it. And this story is very much about that fall from grace, and people living in this age of peace and not realizing that the consequences of their actions can ripple throughout the entire continent and through all of these people. And I do think that you're right. I think episode 1 does capture that like tone change in a great way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The line, like looking back at it now, like the you reek of dragon, right? It's just like even that like one, or you smell it, that it's just like such a huge difference between that and game, because everything we see in Game of Thrones is like, oh, the dragons are like bad business, and then here they're like, oh yeah, you smell like dragon. And it's definitely sort of a different shift. So what did you think? Okay, so you again saw it 2 weeks before everyone else, and you had to sit on the whole like the prophecy of the Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah.
That was tough. And I really, really liked that, because I suppose when you're going back that far in time, when we've just had a decade of, trying to think what year we were in Game of Thrones. But when you sort of jump that far back, you're dealing with a completely different, timeline, family, etc. I was kind of worried that it was going to be too disconnected, if that makes sense. So that little addition at the end, I thought that was brilliant to kind of tie it all in. Especially because now the question is, what's going to happen with that knowledge? Because Dany didn't know it, as far as we're aware. Jon would never have been made privy to it. Everything sort of unfolded in Game of Thrones as it happened. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I think that's a really good sort of overall plot driver. And I'm really interested to see where that goes. And that was another thing that I was kind of like really, really wanted to tell people about, and kind of say it was almost sort of significant in telling us that they've watched Game of Thrones, or they've read the sort of source material, and they're really trying to link it all in and keep it as similar as possible, if that makes sense. Like I say, it was that sort of I was worried about disconnection. So just that little addition, I think it just made all the difference.
Yeah, and it's a huge plot driver, at least so far as we've seen in season 1. I mean, I never thought that Allison Hightower would be the one who hears about the prophecy of ice and fire, and that's what's going to sort of be a motivation for her to think that this is the reason Aegon needs to be. Yeah.
And that's why she turns into Melisandre, obviously.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm still in our iceberg theory mode.
Is she not the Night King? I thought that was
everyone's the Night King.
Everyone is the Night King. Well, speaking of Allison, I think the books sort of, and gosh, I mean, we've just thought for years and years until this show came out that Allison in the book, she, from what we get, she just sort of comes across as kind of like evil.
Yes.
So what, I mean, I think she's probably the biggest sort of difference between the books.
Yes.
So, I mean, what did you think about, like, almost like this naive, like she's a little naive in a way?
I'm still not sure how to feel about it. I think it's important that we remember that the books and the show are separate of each other. Yes, the show's an interpretation, but it's not the book. So I'm pretty sure in the last episode I did with you guys, I trashed Allison. I have videos on my TikTok of me trashing Allison because she is, what I would consider quite an evil character. And I know I'm very much like, oh, no one's evil, no one's good. But she's the instigator for everything in Fire and Blood. She's the one who suggests marrying Rhaenyra to Aegon. She's the one sort of driving everything and turning everybody against each other. So to have that change in the show, I kind of liked it because it very much felt in the books that Allison, because she's older than Rhaenyra, she's quite a lot. Is it 9 years? I think she's older than Rhaenyra. It very much felt like a woman who, she was cunning. She had this life experience of being at court and understanding, all the treachery. It very much felt like she was bullying a little girl. And I hated that. For that reason, as far as the books go, I cannot get on the green side at all. But I liked that they leveled the playing field and kind of told more of a true story about this is what actually happens to women in that era or in this universe. Her dad's using her as a pawn to further his own ambition. Whereas again, I feel like in the books, Allison was very much doing that for herself in order to, gain power for herself. That wasn't the case. So I quite liked that. It definitely felt more real to me. Part of me feels like it's a shame that we've not seen that super dark, malicious side of her. I was looking forward to that, but at the same time, I really do like that it's Rhaenyra versus Allison. Really, at the end of the day, it's that friendship that's completely sort of been destroyed needlessly. So I do like it. I mean, how do you guys feel about the change?
I think the aging down was one of the best decisions that they made whenever they changed from the source material. And I do think we have a lot of time to grow into these characters becoming a lot more darker, which I like the fact that it's not like season 1, it's not clear as day. I mean, for some people it is. If you read the online discourse, for some people it's cut and dry. But for me, I kind of look at Fire and Blood as this historical retelling. And Matt, I know you have a degree in history, so you know how this is. There is always a narrative painted upon history, and this is Allison in the book is very much the trope of like the ambitious woman, right? Like she is trying to rise up and do these things. She does a lot of terrible things, and she is bullying a younger lady, and it's very cutthroat. And that is a trope that actually in real world history that we see a lot. And this kind of makes you wonder and be like, so how was it really? Like, was it different? Was there purpose behind that ambition? Was there a reason why they were so cutthroat? And I like the fact that Allison is a lot more well-rounded. I think it's a more compelling story, even though it is fun to obviously root against people that we dislike a ton. I think that the setup for season 1 and giving this backstory is going to be a really cool test in season 3 or 4 when we look back on this and maybe we do hate Allison or we hate Rhaenyra by the end of the show. looking back on what got us to this point, you know, is going to be a test of like compassion and empathy that viewers will be able to actually, you know, explore. So I think that makes for a more well-rounded program personally.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting too. You know, this season 1, not only did they sort of go with Allison being like, she hears this prophecy that Viserys says as his dying words, and she sort of feels like, hey, this is what I need to fulfill this dream. He believed that Aegon is supposed to be this great savior. Then you add in like the final episode, Aemond and, you know, and Lucerys, or right, or where it kind of a mistake that happened? Was it like necessarily the intent? It was just kind of a scare him. It wasn't actually trying to kill him, and it's going to kick off this whole war. So I think it's going to, as you said, level the playing field, because as we've said, right, the books, it's very much just like greens are bad, blacks are good. And here they're kind of showcasing that maybe that's not the case. We also see some darker sides of Damon, and, you know, is Damon the really the kind of person we should be rooting for? So I think they've done like a really good job of this sort of back and forth on maybe we shouldn't actually root just immediately against the Greens, especially because one of the things that made Game of Thrones so great was actually that we didn't know the end of the story. So you really could root for whatever team you wanted, because there was, by the time the books end, in theory, there's a lot of routes you could go in which Dany wins, or the Starks win, or Cersei wins, and like the Lannisters. Like, you really had that. And here it's just sort of two factions. So I think they're doing a really good job of leveling the playing field.
Yeah, and on top of that, one thing that George has always done extremely well is build these tribes, but then give you a different type of perspective from said tribe. So a lot of people are not really big Stannis fans, or they think Melisandre is evil, but we get Davos's POV from that camp, and we love Davos. Do we not? We love Davos. Where he's the best. So now, the Greens. When we say Greens and Blacks, it's not just like 2 or 3 people. It is a lot of family, and outreaching into the smaller lords and everything. So like, they're all characters in their own right and have their own moral compass and ambitions and motivations, and that makes all of this just way messier and a whole hell of a lot more fun to watch.
Yeah, I think you could make an argument that the most important chapter George has ever written is the first Tyrion chapter in Game of Thrones.
So good.
Because immediately you're like, okay, the Starks are good, Lannisters are bad. And then you get that first Tyrion chapter and you're like, okay, well, I don't know. Maybe some of the Lannisters aren't all bad. And then like, that's what sort of sets the tone for.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, for everything. So, okay, what like, let's see here. What was maybe like your favorite? Do you have a favorite moment, favorite episode?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I have a favorite. I think, surprisingly, I absolutely love Aemond. I don't know what I was expecting, but I've just absolutely fallen in love with that character. Because when you kind of look at him closely, he's the one supporting his mother. He's actually the one who's kind of doing all the emotional lifting for the entire family. But he's still absolutely psychotic. And when we got that sort of final, that segment with Luke and Aemond at the end, I loved that. I was absolutely, because I think I've been very pro-green on my TikTok, in the sense that I've tried to explain that point of view. I'm not saying that they're right, because nobody's right in this. But I was ready for the absolute backlash of Aemond murdering Luke, and it didn't happen. And the way that scene sort of played out, that vulnerability that you saw in him in those few seconds when he realizes what has happened, it just shows you how messy this is. Because I feel like everybody's very much walking around like, no, we're right, we're in charge, we're better than you. And you just knew everything is now going to unravel because a teenager made a mistake. Oh, absolutely, it's his fault. He should not have chased after him on a massive, what were they calling her, a geriatric Godzilla. Right. But yeah, I kind of loved the way that he played that quietly arrogant character, and then just the color just draining from his face. So probably, do you know what? Probably that's my favorite moment, because I wasn't expecting it, even though we knew that it happened. We just didn't know that it happened that way, if that kind of makes sense. So probably that was when my heart was kind of like, oh my God, everything's about to kick off because of this error that this teenager has made, because he cannot control this massive flying lizard. It was almost heartbreaking.
Yeah, we were talking about like just the whole season. I'm like, man, where do you end season 1? Right? Because there's all these time jumps, and everything. And now that I've actually seen it, I think that is actually the best place. But we were just sort of wondering, man, where do you where do you end this? What did you think about the time jumps?
This is probably where I'd get quite critical. I get perhaps why they did it, in the sense that I think with Game of Thrones, had they nailed that ending to the sort of same quality we'd seen throughout the rest of the season, there wouldn't have been an issue. You would have had that loyal fan base who was super, super excited, and they'd have flocked over to House of the Dragon. You'd have pulled in everyone else from the hype. Your marketing campaign would have just been nothing, because your fans would have done the work for you. They didn't have that option. So not only have we got to draw these people back, but we've got to bring new people in and keep them hooked. We don't have we can't rely on that word of mouth and everyone being super, super hyped up for it. And I feel like they maybe condensed it a bit too much. I found it quite jarring that some of the actors stayed the same regardless of how old they were. And then we had, Rhaenyra and Allison change halfway through. And I can't fault the actors for what they did, because, they were all absolutely brilliant. But I did you sort of started an episode and I very much felt like, oh my God, where are we now? Oh, Allison's got a baby and she's pregnant, and right, well, what's Rhaenyra doing? It was very odd. I'd have maybe liked to have seen it drawn out a little bit more. I don't know if they would have got away with drawing that out into 2 seasons, because like I say, I feel like this was make or break. They had to nail this. And that's why I feel like they've crammed in as much as they could. Because if you think back to Game of Thrones season 1, that was all very much sort of setting the groundwork to introduce people to, what was going to happen in later seasons. It felt very action-packed, I would say, if not a little too action-packed. I did sort of find myself a bit confused at points. Oh, where are we? What's going on? So that's probably the strongest criticism that I would have. What about you guys?
I didn't necessarily mind them as much, but what I would say is there was times, especially with Lena and everything that happened there. Like I kind of in Harrenhal and the burning, like I wish it would have been maybe 2 episodes. Like it almost feels like maybe just 2 more episodes in the season would have went a long way. Yeah. And to do that, if you wanted to stretch the budget, you probably would have had to cut back on some of the CGI, some of the action stuff, which I would have been okay with. I do think that it's interesting that the original plan was to do none of this. Apparently, the original plan for the show for Miguel and Ryan was they weren't going to tell any of the story. They were going to start where we're starting in season 2, but George was like, you have to tell the story. So I feel like it was a compromise in some ways. Like if it was up to George, we would have had 13 seasons of like season 1, you know what I mean? If it was up to him, of course, but I feel like it was kind of like a middle ground, and I could feel that compromise in some ways because of the time jumps. I do think like time jumps in general are just impossible to do well. Like I no one likes time jumps. I've never met anyone that like, man, I love that time jump. That was a fantastic time being jarred. And the fact they did it multiple times and they kept the audience is a really good sign. So as much as I wish that maybe it would have taken a little bit more time and had more time in the oven per se, for a figure of speech, I do think that they accomplished what they set out to do, which was get story across, keep the audience hooked, and now they begin the story that they originally set out to tell, which is cool. But yeah, I mean, surely jarring. I know a lot of the more general viewers in my family, my extended family that watch, were very confused and were asking me many questions. So
yeah, looking back at it now, I think the only way you could have fixed it is you'd have to move some events around, and have certain events happen to older people or younger people, or whatever. Had they only done maybe 1 time jump, then it might not have been as awkward. I think it was just sort of the fact that it's like you get to episode 5. Okay, the young Rhaenyra and young Allison, they're gone, and now we get the older Allison and Rhaenyra. But then we still have like a young Aegon and young Aemond, and then like 2 episodes later we have older Aegon and Aemond, and so it's just like there's a lot of moving parts. Maybe you could have had, Aemond, older Aemond, claim Vhagar and lose his eye, right?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been as correct with the books, but maybe you could show that, and then it's like maybe you move a little more hostility in there, and now it's like, okay, it seems like a war is going to break out. Oh, now he's claimed Vhagar.
Yeah.
Ooh, like that might be the only way they could have fixed it, was to just do one time jump.
Fidelity to the source material can be a trap at times, and general audiences, we all want it to be faithful to the books, and that is unfortunately not the only barometer of a successful adaptation or a show. It actually goes way further than that. So I do think at times them being so loyal to the source material actually possibly hurt the visual medium in which they were telling it, just because of time. So that's an interesting conversation, and it's a hot debate on how faithful everything has to be. But I agree, Matt, that I think in some ways, if they had bent some things, that maybe it could have possibly been just a little bit smoother. I mean, obviously it was great. We all enjoyed it, but it's always fun to point out things that maybe could have went a little bit differently.
Yeah. So thankfully we won't have that for, season 2. So I know we just got a little bit more time here. So here's kind of a question, Nikki. What do you think? Yeah, well, this is maybe we're entering a little spoiler territory here, but as we sort of look ahead with House of the Dragon, how do you sort of frame it together? Because Jimmy and I have talked about this, man, by the end, like half the cast is going to be gone, and you have to like bring in this whole new cast, which does happen in Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones is 8 seasons, and this might only be like 4.
See, I'm again very, very conscious of spoilers. I'm trying to work out how they're going to open season 2, because I think there's a very significant event coming up,
right?
That's going to feel very odd if they don't time it properly. I think because of how harrowing it is, I would even put that in as the opener. It's that, I would say, for anyone who's sort of not aware of what we're talking about, I would put it up there with the Red Wedding in terms of, oh my God. Yeah. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it's a nice thing to think that, okay, great, they've ticked all the I suppose corporate boxes and commercial boxes that they need to for season 1 to have been a success. Now they can slow right down and really tell that story, because we've had all of our introductions. I'm not sure. I've also tried to think on how do you end it? Because that's another thing. Where do you kind of draw the line and say, right, we're done? I'm not really sure. And that's probably why I'm not a producer. But I think the big one is nailing that sort of Red Wedding type event that I'm assuming we're going to see in season 2. And that, I think that'll be the telltale sign of how they're going to sort of spread everything else out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Jimmy.
I think that I just wonder like how much time is going to pass between season 1 and 2. Like that's my biggest question, probably because it's the one that's at the forefront of all of our minds. But I feel like that opening shot of season 2 has to be Winterfell. Like I know he goes to the Vale first, but it's just like boom, Winterfell, and then we get to meet some Starks, some very important Starks, which is, in my opinion, one of the most pivotal castings in all of Game of Thrones TV history.
I agree.
Like it has to be nailed, and they will. They haven't missed yet. But that's my guess for the opening shot of season 2, and that's the thing I'm most concerned about. And then that big event that's coming, I think it would be weird if they stretched it out to like a mid-season finale kind of deal. I think that's a lot of time, but I don't know. Maybe they're going to slow roll it a little bit more. I'm curious how many.
I think it has to. Yeah, I think it has to happen within the first 3 episodes.
I agree. Maybe that's the cliffhanger into episode 2. Like episode 1 sets it up, and then episode 2 we open like a cold open into it or something. Woo! Let's go.
I'm very interested to see how they manage that. Not necessarily just how they show it on screen, but how they handle the narrative of what happens and how it happens. That's going to be big, and I'm a little bit nervous for it. I think because of the little changes that we've seen, which I think have been really, really good. I'm not sure if that's something we need to change, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Do you last little thing here, so season 1 introduced the idea of the prophecy of ice and fire, like a bigger sort of connected thing. And do you think we're going to add anything else like that in the potential seasons that could be used as something to sort of set up other Game of Thrones events or something like that? Like, I'm not saying we're going to see White Walkers, but at the same time, do you think we might see something like that? Or
I'm not sure, literally just because I read an interview with George R. R. Martin, and he said he was very conscious of not sprouting too many different branches and spreading things out to a point where it just becomes confusing to keep up with, says the book readers. And I'm just trying to think, because everything is going to have to be linked back to Game of Thrones. That's your kind of, your flagship, I suppose. So anything they do, I think they will need to demonstrate why it was relevant to that, if that kind of makes sense. So I don't know. I'm not sure what they would do or how they would do it, because I feel like a lot of things, were sort of missed out in Game of Thrones. One of the big things for me was when Cersei was talking to Maggie the Frog about the prophecy. They missed out the bit about the Valonqar. And that was a sort of red flag for me, because I was like, well, that's the most important part. That's why she's absolutely, loathed Tyrion. It's all down to that. Why have they not left that in? That was meant to be her demise. So yeah, little things like that were left out. If they were going to add other bits in, other prophecies, that kind of thing, I feel like they'd need to link it back to Game of Thrones, and I don't know how they would do that given how much they sort of cut out from the books.
Yeah, the one thing I've sort of thought, and I still stand by this, and I could almost still see it happening, is I kind of feel like an easy thing to do. I don't know if you could do White Walkers. I just don't. But I do feel like they're gonna try at some point to do something, whether it's to help set up Snow or just tie it back into Game of Thrones as they're beginning to create this sort of like Westeros verse. I think an easy one to do. I know the actress who plays Melisandre has said, like, I'd love to show up in the show. I don't think we'll see Melisandre. I could see assassins being hired. I think you could easily bring in Jack and Hagar, and that'd be like a blow Twitter up moment, because we don't really know that much about him. We don't know if you can use faces forever or if they sort of deteriorate. We don't really know how they work, but I think that would be one that would like really cause Twitter to explode if that's the end of an episode.
I like
you're just
that,
using it to assassinate somebody. But I do sort of think that somewhere along the line, because I don't think any of us were expecting the prophecy of ice and fire to be like to be an event, and the prince was promised to show up in House of Dragon. So I that's kind of if I have to pick like a guess about something, that's where I think
I like that one.
It could be easy. So okay, well, I know we're running out of time here, but Nikki, I guess you said Aemond, favorite character. Jimmy and I have been on our sort of big favorite moment was kind of the King Viserys episode 8. I mean, we just gotta talk about that real quick. So, I mean, what did you think of episode 8?
Oh God. So I feel like we can run over a bit, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I feel like in the run-up to House of the Dragon starting, I spent a lot of time warning people, Damon is not a nice man. You don't want to simp for him. Trust me. And I feel like I was right in that judgment. And and don't get me wrong, I love Damon. I think he's brilliant. I think the last time I was on here, we were saying Matt Smith is going to nail this, and he absolutely has. I adore what he's done with that character. But he made my skin crawl.
Yeah.
And I was very much of the opinion Damon is just out for himself. Damon does what Damon wants, and that is it. And I feel like that was very consistent all the way through. Even still, you know, we could argue how much does he love Rhaenyra? How much is it to do with his ambition? I still think a lot of it is to do with him trying to get power for himself. That scene as Viserys is coming in to defend his daughter, and he should not be out of bed. Just as Damon is helping him up, my heart was breaking, and I kind of thought, I've got this man wrong. I haven't. But I thought that was such a touching thing to add in, because the crown falling off and him putting it back on his head, that wasn't scripted, was it? I think that was totally an accident.
Just happened.
It was perfect. But I really liked that little softer side that we saw to Damon, where he was kind of like, do you know what? Nothing else matters right now. This is my brother. This is the king. And, you know, he's on his deathbed and he's still coming out to defend his daughter, and I am going to stand by him. Yeah, that was just, like goosebumps. Yeah, I loved that. Yeah, now that you've said that, that's definitely up there as one of my favorites.
That was like a true masterclass in acting. It was just insane. But it is interesting, you know, there was a deleted scene of Damon consoling his daughters right after their mother dies, and they didn't showcase that. So seems like they are really filming a wide variety of Damon, I think, to give you this back and forth, because for every moment that Damon does something where, even though it wasn't in there, he consoles his daughters after their mother dies, he helps his brother up to the Iron Throne, there's a scene where he chokes his wife. So, you know.
Well, I think that one of the things about Damon as a character is that he's very concerned with himself and his power, but he is also very concerned about the image of House Targaryen and how he thinks the Targaryen should rule. He's always talking about Valyria and how they used to do it, returning the dynasty to its former glory. You know, thinking about the olden days and how they were so much better, I guess. So I think that when it comes to Damon and Viserys in that amazing scene, I think it's Damon giving his respect back to his brother, because you're right, Viserys should have been in bed. Viserys didn't need to be there, but he fought his last fight. He came down, he walked. It's this monumental moment, honestly, in Damon's mind, I think, that speaks to that Targaryen difference of like what a normal king would be like and what a Targaryen king should be like. And I think in that moment, Damon said, like, you are my brother. You are a true Targaryen, and I'll take it from here, is probably what he's thinking. But I do think in that moment, that is like kind of where that bridge gets built between them after everything that's happened. And I think it's because there's like this display of just like courage and will. And Damon's mind, that is because he's a Targaryen, and he finally lived up to that name.
Love that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Very reminiscent of, you know, Tywin Lannister talking about the importance of the name and, you know, how significant it is. Awesome. Okay. Well, that's a perfect place, I think, to sort of tie this up. So thank you, Nikki, so much for coming on. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am predominantly rambling on TikTok. It's the same handle as you can see on screen, at Kale_EC. I'm on Twitter as well. I think I'm just at Lady Lannister on that. So yeah, if you kind of want to come and pick on me there, that's probably the easiest place to do it. But yeah, TikTok is the main one. That's where you can find me.
Yeah, and you also the season 8 podcast.
Oh yeah,
season 9.
Well, yeah. So the so the season 8 podcast, you can listen to that. I think it's just GOTSARS8r.com. And that is a full 10 episode rewrite of a radio play, or a 10 episode rewrite of season 8 that we've done as a radio play. We've got a full cast, totally narrated, sound effects and everything, you name it. And I am Daenerys. and some other random voices. I'm trying to remember who else I am. I think I'm Osher, and one of Varys's little birds, which was quite scary to listen back to. But yes, so we've done that, and we are about to start Robert's Rebellion in the next few months, which we're hoping to come out in autumn.
Fantastic.
Oh, sweet. So cool.
It's really
awesome.
Cool.
Very excited for that.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Every time we get to talk to you, it's so much fun. Might have something coming, here in the near future. Again, got to plan out some details. Jimmy and I have been hinting at something. We want to keep that under wraps a little bit, but absolutely. So awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.